Boys and girls are not interchangeable learners, but our schools often act as if they are. Today, Dr. Leonard Sax joins us to explain why that assumption hurts both students and families. This is I Demand a Meeting, a podcast where two educators in private schools talk honestly about leadership, teaching, and the things we don't usually say in faculty meetings. I'm Jesse, that's Jared. Dr. Sax earned his bachelor's degree in biology from MIT, where he graduated Phi Beta Kappa in 5 semesters at the age of 19. He then went on to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned both his PhD in psychology and his MD. He has more than 30 years' experience as a family physician. He's led workshops for more than 500 schools, not only all across North America, but also in Australia, Bermuda, England, Germany, Italy, Mexico, New Zealand, Scotland, Spain, and Switzerland. He has written 4 books for parents, 4 powerful, impactful books for parents: Why Gender Matters, Boys Adrift, Girls on the Edge, and The Collapse of Parenting, which is a New York Times bestseller. He's been a guest on the Today Show, CNN, Headline News, PBS, Fox News, NPR's Weekend Edition, the BBC, and many other national and international media outlets. His essays about child and adolescent issues have been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, First Things, and many other outlets. You can watch some of the TV interviews and read some of his articles and link to his recent interviews with, for example, Megyn Kelly and Bishop Robert Barron at leonardsax.com. Dr. Sax, welcome, gracious welcome to the I Demand a Meeting podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
We're so happy to have you, sir. We couldn't think of anyone better to help us think through how schools can more effectively educate boys and girls. We're also looking forward to your insights on how parenting has changed and how that's shaping kids long before they ever walk into the classroom.
Dr. Sax, thank you so much for being here today. I want to start, Jesse and I have been talking the last few weeks about boys and education, and as educators ourselves, we've seen some of the things you've been writing about so often. So tell us, what are your biggest concerns right now about boys? And then maybe we'll get to the girls next, but what are your largest concerns you have right now in the educational system?
Well, we've got very good data that boys are falling farther and farther behind their sisters on many parameters. Richard Reeves has established a new organization called the American Institute for Boys and Men, AIBM.org, and it's just a treasure trove of data showing that, who's earning the best grades. Girls now outnumber boys by more than 2 to 1 in the top 10 percentile of grade point average. And that's true not only across the board, it's true in science, it's true in technology, it's true in every content area. Girls get better grades than boys do in every content area, including math and science, K through 12. That wasn't true 20 years ago, 30 years ago. 20, 30 years ago, boys enjoyed a significant advantage in math and science, not anymore. And it's not primarily because girls are doing better. If the gender gap was getting bigger because girls were doing better, I don't know that that'd be a problem. It might be cause for celebration, but it's not the case. The gender gap is growing mainly because boys are doing worse. And there's so much data on this that I present in my book, Boys Adrift. Let me just give you one data point. Who reads for fun? 40 years ago, the National Endowment for the Arts did a large survey of American kids, children and teenagers, and asked them, what do you like to do in your spare time? They were especially interested in who reads for fun. Well, 40 years ago, girls were slightly more likely than boys were to read for fun. More recently, they did it again. Mark Bauerlein, who was then director of research at the National Endowment for the Arts, and his colleague Sandra Stotsky did it again, surveyed a large and demographically representative sample of girls and boys across the United States and asked them, what do you like to do in your spare time? With special interest in who's reading for fun. And they found, quote, that the gender gap has become a chasm. Not because girls are reading more. They're not. Girls today are reading less than they were 40 years ago. But boys have stopped reading altogether. Quoting from their report, reading for fun has become a marker of gender identity. Girls read, boys don't, end quote. The gender gap is growing primarily not because girls are doing better, but because boys are doing worse. Boys have tuned out. White, Black, and Latino boys, for the most part, are simply not motivated to the extent that their sisters are. Somewhat less true for Asian American boys, especially the children of recent immigrants from East Asia and South Asia. But for the most part, white, Black, and Latino boys born and raised in the United States are not motivated to achieve the way their sisters are. This is new. Why? Well, that's the question I try to answer in my book, Boys Adrift, the subtitle of which is the 5 factors driving the growing epidemic of unmotivated boys and underachieving young men. It's not going to fit in a 30-minute podcast. It is a full day, 7-hour workshop, but we can highlight on the topics that interest you.
So I want to ask you such an important topic about boys. If you had your magic wand and Dr. Sachs could run a school for a day, maybe what are just 1 or 2 things, whether it's at the classroom level, how they do recess or PE, wherever you want to start, what would you do in an educational system to make it the experience for boys and the educational outcomes potentially improve?
I'd start early. Deborah Stipek, for many years Dean of Education at Stanford, found that kids form attitudes towards school early, by the end of the kindergarten year. And those attitudes, once formed, are global, stable, and non-contingent, which is a fancy way of saying that the boy who's struggling with phonics decides he's dumb in everything. Very few 5-year-olds will say, well, I'm struggling with phonics, but I'm really good at building a tower out of bricks. They're global, okay? If they're struggling with phonics, they think they're dumb in everything. Stable and non-contingent means that boy decides by the end of kindergarten he's dumb. You come back 6 years later, he still thinks he's dumb. Non-contingent, he doesn't think there's anything he can do or anything that you can do that's going to make any difference. So I would start very early with gender-aware approaches in kindergarten. What do I mean by gender-aware approaches in kindergarten? Very simple. How long can you sit still, be quiet, and pay attention? Well, we've got good research on this point. The brains of girls and boys develop at different rates. Girls develop faster than boys do. A girl is fully mature by about 22 years of age in terms of brain development. A boy is not mature in brain development until 30 years of age, which explains a lot. You'll sometimes hear people say that the human brain is mature at 25 years of age. That's an average. 22 plus 30 is 52. 52 divided by 2 is 26. 25 is close to 26. Girls reach full maturity in brain development by 22 years of age, boys not until 30 years of age. How long can a 5-year-old boy sit still, be quiet, and pay attention compared to a 5-year-old girl? About half as long. So I've had many occasions where a teacher has said to me, when that boy sits down, his brain shuts off. Many 5-year-old boys absolutely have to stand, bounce up and down, and make buzzing noises in order to learn. Sex differences in learning diminish as a function of age. They're practically non-existent among adults. And this is such an important point because when I speak to school leaders, they're like, on my board, when I meet with my board of directors, there are some men, some women. I don't see big differences between men and women and how they learn. Yes, but they're adults. Everyone on that board is a man over 30 or a woman over 22. Sex differences among adults are actually quite small with regard to learning. How long can a 30-year-old man sit still, be quiet, and pay attention compared to a 22-year-old woman? We find no difference. It would be very unusual to find a 30-year-old man who absolutely has to stand, bounce up and down, and make buzzing noises in order to learn. Sex differences diminish as a function of age, but it is common to find a 5-year-old boy who absolutely has to stand, bounce up and down, and make buzzing noises in order to learn. So how to accommodate that? Make sitting optional. That's the first thing I would do in kindergarten and first grade and second grade. Make sitting optional. Now, that's not as easy as it sounds so I was visiting a second grade classroom in Waterloo, Iowa, where they had created, this was Cunningham Elementary in Waterloo, Iowa. They'd created single-sex classrooms, which is a separate topic we will not address today. But they had an all-boys classroom. And the teacher had read a story, and now the boys' assignment was to write answers to the story on a piece of paper. Well, one boy was sitting. The boy on his right was standing and twirling, writing on a clipboard. The boy on his left, Tyreek, was down on the floor, flopping back and forth, making funny faces with his lips. He told me he was trying to make fish faces. I asked the boy who was sitting, I said, were you bothered by what Tyreek was doing? He said, I don't know. What was Tyreek doing? Second grade boys tend to be oblivious of what's going around them, but second grade girls are not. You could not do this in a co-ed classroom because the girl would raise her hand and she'd say, I'm sorry, how am I supposed to get anything done when this bozo here is rotating and buzzing and Tyreek here is on the floor pretending to be a dead fish? She can not only tell you what Tyreek was doing, she can tell you what color socks he was wearing, okay? So sex differences are robust at kindergarten, at at second grade. So how do you accommodate this difference? Well, this is what I do in my workshops. We've got 2 days, 14 hours of stuff to go through. And one difference is students who want to stand are asked to go to the rear of the classroom. Now, that means that you, the teacher, have to move around the classroom, because if you're standing at the front and your kids are standing at the rear, you're going to create classroom management issues. You have to be at the back of the classroom as much as you're at the front of the classroom. But this way, Tyreek can be standing or flopping on the floor without bothering Sonia, who's sitting in her desk. So this is the challenge. How do you create a boy-friendly classroom without disadvantaging the girls? And that's kind of my specialty, because I've learned a lot from visiting now more than 500 schools over the last 25 years.
And that is great insight, Dr. Saxon. I appreciate you sharing that. So for me, I'm a school leader in a middle and high school. And one of the things that I would like to see and am advocating for in my school for our budget for next year is even just a couple of stand-up bistro tables for my classroom, for the classrooms in my building. You referenced younger students in that last example, but is the same true to some degree or extent for older students? And am I onto something with the idea of stand-up bistro tables in my high school classrooms?
So indeed, I used to host conferences on gender-aware instructional practices, and indeed we had a number of presentations on adjustable height desks and how these are beneficial for boys at every age through high school. Getting back to the autonomic nervous system, there's something very fundamental that most girls learn better sitting, and many boys and many men learn better standing. 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, it was traditional in American education when a teacher called on a student, the student was to stand to answer the question. That's a boy-friendly strategy, because boys learn better and they think better when they're standing. When they sit down, their brains shut off. So for many boys, they will do better listening, they will do better speaking if they are standing. This is not true of girls. It's simply not true. This goes back to autonomic, sympathetic, parasympathetic, which we can talk about, and it's pretty well understood. But the great majority of girls learn better sitting at every age. Many boys, not all, but many boys learn better standing, especially in a demand situation like, what's your answer, Jason? Give it to me. He will do better if he's standing when he has to answer.
So we've explained here that boys and girls are not interchangeable learners. And I think we can draw the conclusion based on what we're saying that the sitting, reading, and writing, since you had mentioned that boys are just not as interested in reading as girls are, at least for pleasure.
Well, there's nothing inevitable about that. And I have visited many schools where inspired teachers get boys excited about reading. Gifted teacher boys can turn this around. There's nothing inevitable about this. But you have to understand, the best way to get boys excited about Jane Eyre is different from the best way to get girls excited about Jane Eyre. If you teach Jane Eyre in a boy-friendly way, then the same boy who loves football and video games will love Jane Eyre. I've seen this firsthand. So boys can get excited about reading. They just need a teacher who understands the differences.
What other strategies do you have outside of, for learning in particular and assessing learning, do you have for boys outside of sit, read, write?
My goodness. Let's talk about arithmetic, algebra, number theory. So we all learned from Piaget that concrete comes before abstract. And that's generally true, but not in math. When we're talking about arithmetic, algebra, and number theory, for boys, abstract comes before concrete. And we now understand the neuroscience thanks to researchers at Stanford Medical School. So the folks at Stanford have done some very interesting work. They've done a number of studies. Basically, you have Stanford undergraduates in an open MRI scanner doing math problems, arithmetic and algebra, women and men. And the women and men do equally well. They basically get them all right. But what you're interested in is what brain areas light up while they are doing the problems. Men are compartmentalized on this task. They're using very specific number crunching areas like the hippocampus deep in a subcortical region of the brain. Women are using the whole cerebral cortex. You know, if you took a course in neuroscience, you learned about motor cortex, and sensory cortex. Motor cortex, precentral gyrus, where you move things. Sensory cortex, postcentral gyrus, where you feel things. Women are using motor cortex and sensory cortex for algebra. Now, this breaks all the rules of what we thought we knew about neuroscience. But where do those terms motor cortex and sensory cortex even come from? They came from studies with men. Almost everything we know about neuroscience was learned from studies with men. All the classic studies from the 70s and 80s looking at what brain areas do what, positron emission transaxial tomography studies, PET scans, they had only men in those studies. And you go back and you ask them, why do you only have men in those studies? Why don't you have any women? Well, they say, PET scan, that's ionizing radiation. If a woman's pregnant, it could damage the baby. But you could have asked the woman if she was pregnant. They give you a lot of excuses. The fact is, a lot of the things we think we know about the brain were derived from studies on men. The Stanford study shows women are using the entire brain for algebra. Men are not. They're very compartmentalized. So how is this relevant? So I'm teaching Fibonacci numbers, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 88, 144, 233, and so forth. How do you get boys excited? How do you get girls excited? With boys, you begin with a riddle involving numbers for the sake of numbers. Jeffrey Bisdock teaches middle school math in Minnesota. He begins his math class every day with rapid fire computational drill. Are you ready? Take the number 5, square it, add 11 to that number. Take the square root of that number, add 14, multiply by 5, take the square root of that number. And what do you got? 10. The answer is 10. Except he talks even faster. He talks like an auctioneer. That's great for boys. Boys love that. And even the boy who never gets it right will say, let's do it again. Crunching numbers for the sake of numbers is a very boy-friendly strategy in math. You try this in your co-ed classroom, though, and after a minute, a girl's going to raise her hand and say, so, when does class begin? This does not get girls excited. With girls, you want to connect to the real world. So with your Fibonacci numbers, you're going to bring in pine cones, pineapples, and show how this sequence of numbers connects to the real world. With the boys, you don't. You say, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 2. The reciprocal of that number equals that number minus 1. What number am I thinking of? And then you're going to derive phi. And then you're going to derive phi a different way. 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 88, 144, 33, and so forth. And then you're going to say, let's take a circle. Let's inscribe within the circle a pentagon. Let's inscribe within the pentagon an isosceles triangle. Let's calculate the ratio of the hypotenuse to the base. Isn't this interesting? It's exactly the same number that we derived from x minus 1 equals 1 over x. And at this point, half your 7th grade boys are like, whoa, that's really cool. And the girls are like, okay, this is totally irrelevant to everything. With boys, you start with abstract and move to concrete. You're doing equations in multiple variables. With boys, you say x plus 2y equals 60, 2x plus y equals 90. I'm going to show you how to solve for x and y's. With girls, you say, I got a coupon here for the department store. It says this week only, I can get 2 blouses and a sweater for $60 and 2 sweaters and a blouse for $90. How much are they charging me for each blouse and each sweater? And it doesn't matter whether it's blouses, sweaters, jackhammers, or footballs. Concrete before abstract engages girls. Abstract before concrete engages boys. And the neuroscience helps us to understand that. I never use neuroscience in a prescriptive way. I never say you should teach this way because of this MRI scan. But the neuroscience helps me to understand what I observe in the classroom. The girls are using sensory cortex for algebra. So for that girl to hold that pine cone, it helps her to understand the Fibonacci series. And the brain science helps me to understand why that is so. Manipulatives are of no value in mathematics instruction for boys K through 12. And teachers say, no, that's not true. I've read a paper. Go back and look at the paper. They didn't break down male and female. Every paper that breaks down male and female shows manipulatives are of no value for boys at any age. With the exception of boys who have some special disabilities, we're not going to get into that. Don't bring pine cones in when you're teaching boys. Justin's going to start throwing them around like hand grenades. Justin, step away from the pine cones. They're a classroom management issue. With boys, abstract before concrete. With girls, concrete before abstract. This is true only in mathematics instruction. It's not true in any other content area.
Dr. Sax, I want to add to what you're describing here, which is so profound within our math classrooms. What's the role, in your opinion, in a boy-friendly, and you can touch on girls as well, but a boy-friendly school when it comes to competition? What is the role of competition? And Jess and I have talked at length. It's in the blood of a male, and we appreciate the traditional view on gender here. So where does competition fit into a school system?
All right. So competition, I've seen it work and I've seen it fail. So house competition across the school can be very mobilizing. Last name A through E on Alpha team, F through K on Bravo team, L through R on Charlie team, S through Z on Delta team. This will get the boys excited, and you can bring this into the classroom. And the boys want to win for their team. But it won't work at a co-ed school without a tweak, which I'll explain in just a moment. Because Melissa and Emily are best friends, and now they're on opposing teams. And Emily will say, I don't want to beat Melissa. She's my best friend. I don't even know these kids. What do I care about Bravo team? It's totally stupid. And she will not engage, and the program will fizzle. And that's why house competition is not widely deployed in the United States, because the great majority of schools are co-ed, and house competition won't work at a co-ed school. So I'm a big fan of the Harry Potter books. I read all the books to my daughter at bedtime. I love the 7 original books. I know them well. And J.K. Rowling understands gender very well. She really gets it. She knows how girls and boys are different. She's got great insight into human nature. Hermione knows nothing about the game of Quidditch. She doesn't understand it. She's never played it. But she goes to the games and she roots for Gryffindor, and she wants Gryffindor to win. In the 7 books, everyone and everything is fallible. Dumbledore, the wisest of wizards, makes a terrible mistake, leads to his death. Voldemort, the greatest of the dark wizards, makes a terrible mistake that leads to his demise. Harry Potter, the hero, makes a terrible mistake. The death of Sirius Black, the one man, the one adult who really loved him, is Harry's fault. Harry screwed up. Everyone makes mistakes. There is only one infallible entity in the Harry Potter books, and it is the sorting hat. If the sorting hat says that you are a Gryffindor, you know that you share something profound and fundamental with every Gryffindor, which you do not share with a Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff or Slytherin. So Hermione goes to the stadium and she cheers for Gryffindor, even though she has no idea what's going on the field. When Gryffindor scores a point, she cheers. And it makes sense, because she's a Gryffindor. So it works. That's what you need in order for house competition to work at a co-ed school. You need a 500-year-old magical sorting hat, but you don't have a magical sorting hat. So what can you do to get the girls to care, to get the girls to be just as engaged as the boys are? Here's what you do. Girls against boys. Your teams are very simple. Girls against boys. Girls like to beat boys. Boys don't like to be beat by girls. Now, you must begin with sports. You can't begin with spelling bee, because in the United States today, boys think girls are smarter. I was speaking at a middle school. So I said, this next question is just for the boys. Gentlemen, I was looking in the hallway at the principal's honor roll. There's 22 names on the principal's honor roll, 19 girls and 3 boys. Can any of you boys explain to me why there's 19 girls but only 3 boys on the principal's honor roll? And several boys raised their hand, and they all gave some variation on the same answer. Girls are smarter. This is what boys now believe. This has been their observation. Girls get better grades than boys do K through 12. Girls are smarter. So you can't begin with spelling bee, because competition motivates only if you think you can win. And if you think girls are smarter, they're going to win, so who cares? You must begin with sports. So Columbus City Public Schools in Ohio invited me to lead 3 days of professional development for school administrators, August, November, and May. So in the August presentation, I said house competition, but it's girls against boys, school-wide. But got to start with sports. It's going to work great. So end of September, I got a call from the elementary school principal. She said, Dr. Sax, we tried your thing with the girls versus boys, and the girls love it. Boys couldn't care less. It's not working. I said, do you remember what I said about starting with sports? She said, yeah, we did. I said, well, what sports did you start with? Hopscotch. Hopscotch and dancing. Hopscotch and dancing were the 2 sports. I said, okay, my bad. I should have been more specific. You don't start with hopscotch and dancing because boys regard those as girl sports. You start with basketball in an age-appropriate way. Obviously, third graders are going to have a low basket and a little ball, but girls will beat the boys at getting the ball in the basket from the foul shot. And that's true K through 12 as well as in the professional leagues. In the women's NBA, it's common to find a woman who can nail 50 in a row. Shaquille O'Neal was lucky to hit 70%. Women are better at hitting a stationary target than men are. Men are better at hitting a moving target than women are. That goes back to hardwired differences in the visual system that you'll find in my book, Why Gender Matters. So, first task is foul shots. Second task is tug of war. This is for K through 8. Boys think they're stronger than girls, but K through 8, they're not. The average 11-year-old girl is bigger and stronger than the average 11-year-old boy. The boys will lose the tug of war. And finally, obstacle course. Obstacle course is a series of balance beams. If you fall off the balance beam, you have to go back to the beginning. It's a test of balance. Girls beat boys at any test of balance, K through 12 as well as adult. So now the boys have lost 3 sports competitions to the girls. And you say, all right, week from Monday, we're going to have a spelling bee. Every 8th grader will be required to stand and spell one of these 100 words. So start preparing. And the boy who doesn't think he's a great speller will now be studying that list of words because his contribution may be decisive. So boys against girls competition works. There's a lot more to this than what I just said, but house competition can be great, not just for motivating kids in the content area, but for creating a culture of respect. Because disrespectful behavior will lose points for your house. As I point out in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, American kids are now raised in a culture of disrespect. The most popular videos on YouTube and TikTok teach kids that it's cute and funny to be disrespectful. So kids come to school and some kids are defined and disrespectful. You give them a discipline referral, big whoop. That's fine. They don't care. But house competition changes that because now you're losing points for your team. And the other boys will say, what is your problem, Jason? You just lost 100 points. And the disrespectful behavior stops. You create a culture of respect. So there's a lot more to say about the virtues of house competition, but at a co-ed school, it's got to be girls against boys.
I like that. One of the things that Jared and I have shared, Dr. Sax, is just that idea for girls. I know you can do it. For boys, I bet you can't do it. But let's shift gears just a little bit. If we as school leaders really made an effort to push strategies that help boys to have a better experience while they're at school, wouldn't some then argue that that could have an impact on the girls and potentially a detrimental impact on girls? Or just in general, what are some ways that working with boys impacts girls, or maybe even in less obvious ways?
If we ignore gender differences, we end up with boys who think creative writing and art is for girls. If we ignore gender-aware instructional strategies, we end up with girls who think that computer coding and physics and engineering is for boys. So I share gender-aware instructional strategies to get girls excited about computer coding and physics and engineering, beginning in the early years. And we've got good stuff on this, which you can deploy in the co-ed classroom. You don't need single-sex classrooms. You need teachers who understand the differences. The best way to get girls excited about computer coding is profoundly different from the best way to get boys excited about computer coding. The best way to get boys excited about Emily Dickinson or American history is very different from the best way to get girls excited about Emily Dickinson or American history. And you can do this in a co-ed classroom, and you will boost achievement for both girls and boys.
So I want to ask you before we're finished here today, Dr. Sax, you touched a little bit about the collapse of parenting and such a powerful and helpful book. For the parents listening to this episode today, what are your 1 or 2 parents you just need to know and hear this today? What do our parents need to hear?
So one of the points I make in the collapse of parenting is that many parents are reluctant to exercise their authority. But childhood works only if parents do exercise their authority. You know, a 4-year-old horse is a mature adult. The Kentucky Derby is raced with 3-year-olds. A 4-year-old human has barely begun. Humans are children or adolescents for more years than most animals live. Why does it take so long? We don't have to guess. We have scholars like Dr. Melvin Counter at Emory, who's devoted his career to this question. He wrote an 800-page tome, The Evolution of Childhood, Oxford University Press, comparing development in our species with development in other species, especially other primates. And the answers that the experts give is that development takes as long as it does so that parents can teach right and wrong, can teach culture to their kids. And I mentioned that in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, that that's your job as a parent, to teach right and wrong to your kid. And then right alongside that, I cite a column, a long-term columnist for the New York Times, Jennifer Finney Boylan, wrote a column on enlightened parenting, in which she asserts that enlightened parenting means, quote, setting your kid loose to discover for themselves their own right and wrong. And if in so doing your child becomes a stranger to you, then so be it, end quote. That's the New York Times. Well, that's not enlightened. That's a dereliction of duty, and it's profoundly unhuman. It's not what's in our DNA. It's not what sets us apart as a species. If you set your kid loose to discover for themselves their own right and wrong, and they have a device with internet access, what they will discover is Drake, Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, mainstream pornography. American culture has become a toxic culture. What I mean by that is that the more a kid is immersed in American popular culture, the more likely that kid is to become anxious, depressed, and disengaged. That wasn't true 30 years ago or 50 years ago. It is very much true today, and I explore the reasons why that is so. So you have to exert your authority as a parent. You have to limit, govern, and guide what your kid is doing with their screens. No screens in the bedroom. And you have to be willing to exercise your authority. And many parents are reluctant to do that. And I wrote the book for you, for that parent who's a little uncomfortable exercising authority, who doesn't understand the difference between authoritarian and authoritative, who thinks exercising your authority means whacking your kid, which it does not mean. So I explain how you exercise authority in a loving way that builds the family.
On that note, Dr. Sax, at what age do you recommend cell phones and social media for young adults?
All right.
Or allowing it, I guess I'd
say. So those are two separate questions. Cell phones is one question. Social media is another question.
Or I'd say smartphones, smart devices, yeah.
Yeah, smartphones. So I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal more than 10 years ago, sharing a story of a girl who shared who sexted her boyfriend, and the photographs leaked, and it was a catastrophe. He let his phone down at a party, and another boy picked them up and posted the photos, and it was just a catastrophe. She was 12 when that happened. So based on the research available then, I said no child under 13 years of age should have a smartphone. Well, Jean Twenge has just come out with a new book, 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. And she says no child under 16 should have a smartphone. She realizes that the great majority of American kids under 16 have a smartphone. She's written a speech for you to give your 14-year-old explaining why you're taking their smartphone away, giving them a dumb phone, a basic phone instead. So Jean Twenge asserts that no child under 16 should have a smartphone. That's controversial. Certainly no child under 13 should have a smartphone. Absolutely. They have a basic phone so that they can call you if their ride doesn't show up. But they should not have a smartphone. No question about that. No child under 13 has a smartphone. Whether it's 13 or 16, I think is hard to say based on the evidence. Social media is a much easier question to answer. No child under 18 should have access to social media. That is Jean Twenge's recommendation, and that is based on the evidence. No child under 18 on social media, for sure.
Well, Dr. Sax, I'm excited that you've got updated editions, both a third edition of Boys Adrift and an updated edition of Collapse of Parenting coming out. Thankful for you working on those, and I'm excited.
The new edition of The Collapse of Parenting is read by me. That's a first time they let me read it. So I hope you go to audible.com, listen to the free sample, and see what you think.
Very good. Well, Dr. Sax, thank you for helping us see that boys and girls are not problems to be managed, but are people to be understood. Our hope is that this conversation encourages both schools and parents to slow down, to pay attention to how children actually develop, and to respond with greater wisdom, patience, and intentionality. Friends, thank you for joining us on I Demand a Meeting. Thanks to our listeners for being part of the conversation.
Thank you.